All right. I'm assuming people could see this. Um, Now that you've gone live, it says that I've gone live. Um, I apologize for the 13-minute delay. I had a real trouble getting Facebook Live to work. It was asking me to answer a lot of questions first that I normally don't have to do. Um, I want to assure you I know how to use Zoom so that if you ever take a class with us, we can use Zoom and we won't have this problem. But anyway, it's recording now and it's available for others. And obviously, I've started late, but I'll finish a little late too. But I'm here. Two quick things. Michelle's been ill all week. We both have. You can hear it in my voice, but she's worse. So I'm going to handle this today. If you want to see an example of one that Michelle and I did together, we did mortgages and conveyances as a Facebook Live back in on July 8th. So if you've read chapters 18 and 21, and some of you have already studied for it and some haven't, but if you've read 18 and 21 and you want a little bit of information about that, we did a Facebook Live on that that's still recorded and available. I'm hoping to get a few comments to show that people are actually accessing this to make sure that it's working. And so far, I haven't gotten any comments. So I'm asking a comment, are you seeing this? And hoping that somebody will say that they are. I show two viewers, and I just want to make sure that people are actually seeing this. Any comments yet? No comments. That's worrisome to me. Okay, Madison says yes. So that's a good news. Well, I'll just keep recording. I haven't started anything substantively yet, but I apologize for the delay. So, two weaknesses about Facebook Live that we don't have with Zoom, if you have any experience with Zoom. One is that the chat function in Zoom is easier to follow in real time. So that's right. Stacy's saying she can see me. So that's I can see you, Alan. I think that means that she's seeing me. And so there's a little bit of clunkiness in terms of my being able to answer questions in real time, but I'm going to try to go back to the comments and answer all the questions eventually, even if I can't do them all exactly when you ask them. The second thing Zoom's really good at is share screen. And I have one thing I'd like to show you, but I can just read it to you and it'll be fine. I'll also put a PDF of it on the Facebook page later so you'll have access to it. But normally in a class, I would just share screen and show it to you instead of my face. But anyway, this will work fine. So I just wanted to tell you that we're kind of do two different things for the next hour. One is to talk about how to register for the exam, and I recognize that many of you are past that stage, and this part of the class will be boring. But the other thing is to talk about the exam itself, the format, the tips for studying, preparation, resources, and the rules for it. And I think most of you are at that stage, but I do want to talk about how to register for the exam. First of all, as a global matter, you need to know that there are 3 exams a year, at least next year, that's how many they've assigned. They've done as many as 4 and as few as 2 in the past. But next year, they've already assigned 3 exams. Now, there actually be 5 or 6 exams given, but there's 3 exam administrations in that March 2nd has a spillover date of March 16th, June 15th has a spillover date of June 22nd, and September's exam hasn't announced a spillover date, but I think it's quite likely they will have a spillover date just to accommodate more than can be handled at the test sites. That's how they've gone in the last couple of years, so you can anticipate they'll keep doing that in the future. What that means is you have to reserve both March 2nd and March 16th in your calendar because you won't know until 10 days before the exam that you're assigned to either March 2nd or March 16th. You don't have any control over that. So you don't know until the last minute which date you're taking it. That's very inconvenient, but that's the way they've been doing it lately. You can't really game that by waiting to register late and hoping to get the late date because it seems to be randomly assigned. And so it doesn't really matter if you register today or register at the last minute for purposes of trying to get the right date. You're just going to get a date, and that's the way it is. Now, they do more people in the first date, so statistically, you're more likely to get March 2nd than you are March 16th, but you can't count on it. The other thing they tell you 10 days before is which location you get. There are three testing locations: Baton Rouge, Alexandria, and Shreveport. And you won't know until 10 days ahead of time which one you're getting. Now, you can predict if you're pretty close to one of those locations. New Orleans, you'll get Baton Rouge. Somewhere in Avoyelles Parish, you're going to get Alexandria, I assume. And Ruston, you're going to get Shreveport, I'm guessing. But you don't have any control over that either, in the sense that they will assign you a location, and that's the way it is. Now, unlike the date is unnegotiable. You can't call up the Secretary of State and say, I can't make March 2nd. They'll just say, too bad. And even the last administration, they had some people with diagnosed COVID, and they were told, too bad. So that's they're intractable on that. There might be some wiggle room as to location. If you get assigned Baton Rouge because you live in Baton Rouge and your permanent residence is Baton Rouge, but you happen to be going during that semester to LSUS and you live in Shreveport temporarily, it's not where your commission's going to be, it's not your permanent domicile or residence, but it is where you are for the time of the exam administration. You can ask LSU and LSU testing, Office of Testing and Evaluation, and or the Secretary of State to please relocate me to, in this example, Shreveport. And they might accommodate that if you give them a good reason. So you can't change the date, but you could possibly change the location, but only with a really good explanation like the one I just gave. So that's next year's tests. When you use next year's test, or when you take next year's test, the only book you can use, it's open book, but you can only use the 2024 edition of Fundamentals of Louisiana Notary Law and Practice, which won't be released until middle of January, maybe early January, but certainly by the middle of January 2024, they'll have a new edition out. And that's the only one you can take into the exam room for any of those 4 or 5 administrations or tests. There's really 3 administrations or 3 groupings of dates. That's very difficult for people who are just coming new to studying and don't have access to an older study guide. But I will talk at the end of the hour about kind of ways to mitigate this problem, that the March 2nd exam is a little too early, and yet not so early that they'll allow you to use the older study guide. Now, I keep calling it the study guide, even though the title is Fundamentals of Louisiana Notarial Law and Practice, because everybody calls it the study guide. So when you talk about study guides, that doesn't make sense to most people. They think you're referring to this one book, because the original title of it had study guide in it. It's only been changed over the last 10 years to include the word fundamentals and all of this. But it is the study guide, the state study guide you buy from the Secretary of State when it's available for $100, $105. And they mail it to you right away. They're pretty good about that, but it'll be a while before it's actually released. It's been released as late as middle of February during the pandemic time. I haven't heard any problem with it this year that it might be released late. So I'm guessing around January 10th or so we'll all have it available. I'll talk about other study resources that aren't the study guide in a little bit. But let's finish talking about registration. You definitely don't want to wait till the last minute to register. The Secretary of State's website tells you all the rules about registering and the process of registering that I'm about to go over. And they give you the absolute late deadlines. But their website, or the account that you have online with the website, is clunky enough that you run the risk that if you wait till the last day, it won't work. And then you try the next day and they'll say you're too late. So do not wait till the absolute late deadlines for this. I would get this out of the way sometime in 2023 for the March 2nd exam. once you know you're going to take it and you're committed to studying, you should commit to the exam as well. You shouldn't wait till the last minute. So, what's the process for registering for? I'm going to keep using the example of the March 2nd exam, though it would be the same later for the June 15th exam. Uh, well, the first step is called the application to qualify. You go online at the Secretary of State's website, create an account, and answer a bunch of questions that show that you are at least eligible to become a notary. Things like that you live in Louisiana, that you are have a high school diploma, that you are not a convicted felon unless you've since been pardoned, that you are registered to vote, at least if you're a citizen, where you then could vote. And so these are all things that if they're a problem, you need to get taken care of now. Like if you're not registered to vote, but you're eligible to vote because you're a citizen in Louisiana, you need to go Monday and register to vote so that you can swear that that's true and you'll be on the voting rolls when you apply. But the application to qualify is just the first step that says, I meet the basic qualifications of a notary. And once you answer those questions in the affirmative, within a few days, they will write back and accept your application to qualify. It doesn't mean that if you lie on it, they can't go back and punish you for that or remove your eligibility and things of that sort. So that's why I say if you really aren't registered to vote, go ahead and do that first before you attempt the application to qualify. Once the application to qualify is granted, and I say a few days, but it could be a week, the next step is they will open a link on your account that allows you to sign up for and pay everything you have to pay for the pre-assessment exam. And the pre-assessment exam is supposed to be information to help you decide whether it's worth it to go through all this process and this money, even though they've made you pay twice to get to that point, to decide you're even into this process of becoming a notary. But most people think you have to study for it or it has some legal questions. The pre-assessment exam has no relationship to the notary exam whatsoever. It is merely a reading comprehension exam. It's likely to be a paragraph on butterflies and moths, and then a series of questions that make you show that you've understood the paragraph on butterflies and moths. And then the next paragraph will be something about Johnny's attempt to go to college and thinking about his priorities. And then you answer questions about that. So it has nothing to do with notary law. It's just a reading comprehension exam. Then they give you a score on it within probably pretty quickly, but at least within a day or two, once you've taken this online. Set aside about 15-20 minutes to do it online that is uninterrupted because it would time out eventually, or if it software glitches, it'll just go ahead and time out and give you a bad score, which doesn't have any effect on it because there's no score that matters. It's not a pass-fail. It doesn't count against you in any way. It's of no technical value whatsoever. But they will give you a score. I think it's from A to D. It might be from A to E, but I think it's A to D, where A is the best and D is problematic in terms of your reading comprehension. Some people say it's worthless or a money grab from them. I would say that it's one data point in a long series of data points that you've received in your life of whether you'd be good at multiple choice exams, whether you'd be good at a reading intensive program, which this certainly is. So take that information for what it's worth, but I would say combine it with all sorts of other information you've received in your life about how good you are at reading English and understanding paragraphs and then spitting back information. Because if this confirms that you're really not good at any of that, and you've been told that your whole life, then the chances aren't great that you'll pass the notary exam, and it would be a lot of work and some extra money to get to the point of finding out you don't pass it. Some people think it's easy because it is an open book exam with this book, well, the 2024 version of it being the only book you're allowed to use, but the pass rate is quite low. It's less than 20% most administrations, and therefore you can't just wing it or guess and hope that you'll pass. You need to study hard for it, and you need to study in a methodical way, prepare for it in ways that I'm going to talk about in the next hour. To that end, the pre-assessment exam should be a little piece of information you decide whether it's worth it or not. But otherwise, it has no bearing on anything. You don't have to disclose that score to anybody. I think the Secretary of State keeps a record of it just to do their own statistical studies, but it has no effect on how they assign you to anything like which exam you get or anything of that sort. All right. So once you have taken, not even passed, because there's no passing or failing it, the pre-assessment exam, within a few days you'll get not an email that will tell you the score, but eventually on your account on the Secretary of State's website, you'll get a link that allows you now to actually register for the March 2nd exam. And when they say register for the March 2nd exam, they mean the March 2nd or 16th exam. You still don't know. Anyway, they'll give you that link and they'll charge you if you want to go ahead and register for it, but you'll be eligible to do so. Now, the pre-assessment exam will only be taken once in your lifetime. You don't have to take it over. Um, Even if there's a link that, let's say that you decide, in fact, to take the exam in June, and or you fail the March 2nd exam and decide to take it in June, then there may be a link that says you have to first take the pre-assessment exam. Well, that's an error, and if that happens, call the Secretary of State, the Notary Division, and say, I've already taken the pre-assessment exam. I understand I don't have to take it again. And they'll remove that link and allow you then to register without it. So the pre-assessment exam is one and done. However, the application to qualify has to be renewed once a year from the anniversary of when you took it or filled it out the first time. And the reason for that is that your circumstances may have changed. You may have become a felon. You may have lost your ability to vote. You may have moved out of Louisiana. You may have lost your ability to write English. I doubt that one. And so they ask you to reaffirm those once a year. Most people don't get in the situation where they have to do that over and over again, because if you can pass the exam within the next year over the next 3 administrations, then you don't have to reapply for that. But if it does, if you have to put it off or you otherwise fail it and need to take it in 2025, then you will have to do another application to qualify. I think it's $30, so another money grab, but they're making sure that you still are actually eligible to be a notary. But then the pre-assessment exam, if they try to make you take it again, don't pay for that. Don't take it again. But find a way to let them register you for the next year's exam without it making you take the pre-assessment again. All right, so that's the application to qualify, then the pre-assessment, then you register for the actual March 2nd exam. They won't let you go ahead and register for the June exam until after the March 2nd exam, really maybe even after the March 16th spillover date. So they don't open up enrollment or registration for the next one until then. That's everything I think you need to know about the registration process. Now I'm going to talk about some of the kind of the just things about the exam, the rules, and the rules of preparing for it using the study guide. First of all, let's talk about the rules for the study guide. And I'll keep showing you this example, but the one you would actually use will have a different color. We don't know yet the color, and it'll say 2024 on it, at least on the spine. By the way, these notoriously fall apart. So don't think yours is particularly defective because you get one and within 3 days the spine seems to be removed from the rest of the book or it's coming off. It happens to all of us, especially if you use it to study a lot, which you should. So you might want to use a glue gun or E6000 and let it set really hard. And that's just a piece of advice when it does come apart that you can fix it. Now, when we say this is an open book exam and you can only use the study guide, there are some ways you can augment it or enhance it for more practical use during the exam. Here are the things you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to stick in inserts or paste extra pages or stick Post-its in there with extra information. So the only thing you can actually use is the book as it is, but you are allowed to write in it as much as you want to. You're allowed to write in it in pen or in pencil. I recommend pencil in the short run just because you might find that you want to change your notes if you're taking notes in it. Uh, so you're certainly allowed to supplement it by writing in it, but you're not allowed to insert anything or paste anything into it. Now, to get some extra blank pages, many of the teachers will recommend that you white out some pages in here that don't have any value, like the title pages or a copyright page or other pages in there that just seem to be perfunctory. I think eventually you might want to do that, but I don't think you should do that right off the bat. I think you should only do that if you get to the point where you don't have enough pages otherwise. And that's because now, in the last 3 years, they've added blank pages in the back. So there actually is room to insert material without using whiteout. But whiteout does work. Use a lot of thin layers instead of globbing it on. And you won't be able to use pencil on the whiteout. You'd have to use pen at that point. Here's a weird tip. Don't use invisible ink. Not invisible ink. That, of course, that doesn't make sense. Don't use erasable ink. That seemed like a brilliant plan, that if you don't want to use pencil, but you want to use ink, but you'd want to be able to maybe erase it and use it, just use erasable ink. Well, people found out last summer that the erasable ink disappears in the heat. So if you leave your car, your book in the car, and most people do, they come back and all their notes are missing. They were able to salvage some of them by putting it in the freezer for 3 hours, and some of the notes came back. But I'm just going to say skip invisible ink and skip erasable ink, and don't fight the laws of physics that somehow made it erasable, because the friction from the eraser is heat, and that's what erases it. Don't use that. But I think you can use pencils to your advantage. Some of these very thin mechanical pencils, like the Bic Velocity series, is 0.5 millimeters, very, very thin, and works fine. A very thin pen, I use Pilot pens that are very, very thin, so that when I write in it, it doesn't take up a lot of room. Anyway, that's a tip. How else can you augment the book? You're allowed to put tabs in it, but very limited versions of tabs. It has to be this kind of permanent tab that you open up, stick into a page, and press it, and then it is binding in there, and it's really stuck for good. You can't use replaceable Post-its or replaceable tabs. Even ones called permanent tabs that are really replaceable are not allowed. So the Secretary of State on their website has a link to a picture of acceptable tabs. I will just tell you that this brand from Avery works fine. When they say it has to be clear, they mean transparent, but it can be colored. I'm showing you a white or clear one, but when they say it has to be clear, they do accept and show a picture that they accept colored ones, meaning different colors of this. You can, each of these comes with tabs that you can stick in there, or inserts that you can write on and replace. Here's a great tip that I read off Facebook that I think is brilliant, which is, if you're thinking about tabbing, what you should do is not use the permanent ones immediately, but instead use Post-its to make yourself tabs along the way, knowing that the Post-its aren't allowed the day of the exam. They'll send you home, or more likely make you take out the Post-its before you take the exam. They strictly enforce that rule. But while you're studying, you can use Post-its for tabs, and then eventually decide which ones you're going to turn into permanent tabs by using these. These probably you have to go to Amazon to get an Avery brand that's up to 2 inches. And as I say, it can be colored as long as it's transparent. Some big box stores have them, but surprisingly, a lot of times you can't find them because they're really pushing their repositional tabs. And the repositional tabs might be work temporarily, but eventually you would want to replace them with a permanent tab. Now, I'm going to make a pitch for why you shouldn't use a lot of tabs at all, but I'll get to that point. I think you'll wind up using few tabs if you think about it, and if you've studied hard enough that you really don't need tabs to know where Chapter 18 is on mortgages and Chapter 29 is on miscellaneous acts. You're going to know that without tabs. But if tabs psychologically help you, you are allowed to use them. That's the one thing you can stick into the book and they won't say is unacceptable. Now, you can only stick in one per page, so don't think that you can put one at the top and one on the side and they'd be okay with that. They're going to make you cut out tabs that violate their rules. and the limitation is 2 inches. I think this is probably an inch and a half. You could get a slightly longer one. Um, I did what a lot of people did when I took the exam is I used a lot of tabs. And then about 3 days before the exam, I realized they were getting in the way, made it hard to flip open the pages. I didn't really need them for reasons I'll talk about. And I cut it back to like 3 or 4 tabs in the whole book. And even then, I never used the tabs as such. But I'll talk about that when we talk about indexing later. Anyway, the rules are this is the only book you can use. It is an open book exam. But people who think that it's easy because it's an open book exam haven't taken the exam and haven't talked to other people who've taken the exam. It is, in fact, quite difficult. There are a couple of Facebook pages that are quite useful. Louisiana Notary Exam Study Group and Louisiana Notary Study Group. Yeah, I think that's the two. One's administered by me. I fell into it when the person who opened it went off to military service, and I took over. Another is run by Denise Turbenton, who's very, very familiar with notary law and very helpful on that site. So join those groups if you haven't, and I hope you'll join Childress Notary, where we post a few things in addition to those sites as well. So then what can you do with this book? You can supplement it only by tabbing and writing into it, but what you can write into it that is very valuable is an index. It's hard to believe that a book of over 700 pages that's meant to be used in an open book exam has no index. That's almost malpractice. But they're telling you they don't want you to pass it, right? They're telling you they want it to be hard. They don't want somebody to be able to just flip open the day of the exam and find the answers. Now, I don't believe anybody can just flip open the day of the exam, even with an index, and find the answers. So I don't think it would have been much of an advantage if they had just gone ahead and given you an index, if you weren't going to study otherwise. But I think it's nearly impossible to pass the exam without an index, even if you use a lot of tabs, even if you have read it so many times that you're aware of where things are, even if it has, as it does, a detailed table of contents. The reason for that is that this book is notoriously disorganized to the point where if you wanted to answer a question about mortgages, it might be in Chapter 18 on mortgages, but it might also be in Chapter 21 in a little section called Mortgages. Don't know why it's not all in the same place. If you wanted to answer a question about corporate signing of a document, that parts of that are in Chapter 28, parts of it are in Chapter 19, and one mention of it is weirdly in Chapter 21 where it doesn't fit at all. If you use tabs, you wouldn't know all 3 locations. The only way to be able to find that information the day of the exam is through indexes and or cross-referencing. Indexing. Well, the book doesn't come with an index. It does come with a glossary of some of the main terms, but certainly not a complete list of all the information you need. So it doesn't have everything there. I just want to make sure people are still seeing this as we're going. So somebody might write a comment where they say, I'm seeing it and it's recording, because I have no other feedback than what you guys give me. I'm not seeing other people's faces the way I would on Zoom. And so obviously I consider Zoom to be a much superior teaching place. But you have to register for it and all this, so this is better for this. But is anybody still seeing this? I hope so. Otherwise, at least it'll be recorded and people can see it later. But I'm not getting any comments that people are seeing this. That's kind of scary. Anyway, we were talking about indexing. Well, good. The glossary can be turned into an index by adding page numbers to it, but it'd be incomplete because it only mentions the terms they actually define. And they don't ask a lot of questions that are simply the definition that you find in the glossary, because that would be a little too easy of a question, right? So they're going to ask about a lot of stuff that's not in the glossary and that's defined in the book or makes sense from reading the book. So I'm suggesting that you turn the glossary into an index by adding terms and page numbers specific to those terms that help you find it the day of the exam. And I think without an index, the chances of your passing are quite low, because you won't find where they've hidden information somewhere in this. It'll be a question about an executor but it's not found in the section on executors in chapter 24. It happens to be found in the first few pages of chapter 18 on where it says legal mortgages are what an executor posts. You're like, well, why didn't they put that in the chapter about executors? Ask them. I don't know. You need an index. The other way to do an index, it's not my preference, but other people have said it's worked for them, is to use the blank pages at the back and put an index there. So instead of incorporating it into the glossary, which is already alphabetical and has room between terms to stick some in, they, especially if they have big handwriting or they a little OCD and want it to really look neat, we use the blank pages in the back and write an index there. Either way could work. I just caution you that if you use up the note pages in the back, you'll probably wind up using whiteout to create some other blank pages to write other things you might want. Anyway, the index that I suggest, what happened was when I took the exam, I created myself an index, and as a law professor, I was trying to be as complete as possible, so I wrote this gargantuan index, put it in my book, and the next year I published it as part of the side piece book. So this is this year's side piece book. Obviously, the index that's in chapter 12 of this would not work for next year's book. So I'll talk about this and other resources in a little bit. But just to mention that you could create your own index, and that would be great, but it's very time consuming. And I've created what I think is the most comprehensive, I'm confident, is the most comprehensive complete index that's available. So even if you take a class that where they suggest indexing, they'll probably refer you to my book, or they'll give you an index for that class, but it may not be as complete. I'm sure it won't be as complete as the one I've done. So I commend to you chapter 12 of the side piece book to insert an index either into your glossary or separately as part of the blank pages in the back. If you do use my method of indexing, the good news is it's pretty mindless to write it in there. You could be watching TV or listening to TikTok or something while you're just kind of writing index in, and you can interact with the index and look where things are eventually, but the act of writing it in could be kind of just a perfunctory method. The other good news is I think I've covered just about every page where something could possibly be mentioned, so that if you follow that index the day of the exam to all of those spots, go to the first spot. If you can answer the question, you don't need it. But if the first place you go that I've directed you to with page number doesn't answer the question, then you go to the next one and find it in that next section. It'll be there somewhere, because they say at least every question comes down to information that you can find somewhere in the study guide. And therefore, an index seems good. The second thing you can do to supplement your book besides an index is to use cross-referencing. And the study guide does have some of its own internal cross-referencing. Index is at the back and tells you the page where terms are. Cross-references is within the book, where if you're reading chapter 18 on mortgages, you tell yourself to also look in chapter 21 on a certain page where mortgages are discussed as well, so that you know it's in two places. Now, if you use your index methodically, you probably don't need to use the cross-referencing too, because it all should be complete either way. Or if you're really good at using cross-referencing, then you'll use the index less than you otherwise would, at least for those terms that are in two different places in the book. But I think a combination of cross-referencing and indexing will take you to the relevant pages the day of the exam, and that's key. Or put it another way, there's other things you have to do to be able to pass it, but without being able to find it the day of the exam, you're left only going on memory, and their questions are picky and technical enough that a lot of them you would not be able to answer with just memory. You would have to look at specific places in the study guide to find them. Fortunately, if you find the right place, a lot of times the answer is verbatim in there. And as long as you understand the problem and you're looking in the right place, you'll find a sentence in there that answers the question. I'm now going to talk about the actual format of the exam and the rules about it. So I've talked about how you can kind of supplement this or make it better or more usable the day of the exam, but you're limited to this 2024 edition of the study guide. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about, though, is the actual format of the exam. March 2nd, you'll get this exam, and there may be 2 or 3 excuse me, versions of the exam in the test room, but they ultimately are pretty much the same exam with just different order of the questions so that you're not sitting next to someone that you could cheat off of. But presumably the questions that count will be the same for everybody who takes it on March 2nd. And then on March 16th, it'll be a completely different exam. But within a test room, there might be 2 or 3 versions of that, usually 2, Test A and Test B, and people compare those, but by and large, Test A and Test B work out to be the same exam in different orders. There might be 1 or 2 questions, or maybe even 5, 10 questions that are different, but more likely, if that's true, those are experimental questions that don't count one way or the other towards your score. So let's talk about the format of the exam, and I'll just use March 2nd as an example. On March 2nd, you're assigned to Baton Rouge. You go to Hines Hall. They tell you you have a 5-hour window to take the exam. You can't, if you take a break, then you're eating into your own time. And if you want to seek accommodations for time or a better room, there are methods on the Secretary of State's website for seeking accommodations. But I'm going to speak in terms of you're having 5 hours and 5 hours only in a big room with a bunch of other people, not having a quiet room or any other accommodation. Accommodations are your business, and you can deal with that with the Secretary of State. But the within that 5 hours, you can go to the restroom, you can go and sip water, you can take medicine if you need to, but you're giving up time to do that. So I wouldn't do that too often. I talked to somebody yesterday who said that her big fatal flaw, taking the exam in September, she felt was that she took so many breaks, in part because the room was so cold. You need to take a jacket or a sweatshirt to be ready for a really cold testing room, that she felt like she didn't give adequate time to the exam. And it's pretty time pressured for a 5-hour exam. You would think, well, that's plenty of time, but most people take most of the time, at least if they're doing it right. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to mention is the actual format of the exam. Each one will have somewhere between 70 and 80 questions. Rarely 80, rarely 70, usually 72 or 75, maybe 78 questions. But theoretically, somewhere between 70 and 80 questions in a 5-hour exam. Now, of those 80, let's say, 8 will be experimental questions that don't count. But for math purposes, just to explain it, I'm going to assume that there are 75 questions of which all 75 count, even though I know that that's not true. A passing score is a 70. Now, on the website, they'll say 75% because I guess officially the passing score is 75. But they almost always reduce it to 70, or the target you should be aiming for is 70% of the questions right. It's possible that they'll make 72 the passing score if it turns out the test is too easy and too many people in their mind are passing it at a 70. And they don't guarantee anything other than a 75% will pass. But given that they almost always reduce it to 70, it's fair for you to think of that as the passing score and to shoot for it. What does that mean? Well, the good news is that gives you a margin of error on an exam of 75 questions, if we assume that they all counted, that you could miss 20, 21, maybe even 22 questions and still pass the exam. Now, it's still a really hard exam, and you shouldn't be going in there thinking, I can just miss questions left and right and I'll be fine. But I think you ought to have at least the confidence of knowing that one particular question that's stumping you isn't worth spending more than 4 or 5 minutes on and ruining the rest of the exam, because that one question is unlikely to be decisive. Or, put it this way, obsessing about that one question is not going to help you when you're skipping over 4 questions or giving short shrift to 4 questions because of it, that those 4 questions will probably wind up being decisive. Getting one of those right would make up for that one that you just put an answer down and move on. So let's say it's about 75, and they will break it up into sections with headings on them, probably 5 sections of 15 questions each, or something roughly like that. And so one section might be called Testaments and Successions. The next section might be Donations. The next section might be General Notary Practice or something. And they're then groupings by subject matter. It's a little misleading though, because within that subject matter they're allowed to ask anything they want. So something about donations might really work out to be a question about notary practice. A question on small successions often is really about valuing an estate, which is more about community property law from chapters 8 and 12 than it is from small successions, chapter 27. So again, you'd be looking in the wrong place if you haven't read the material closely and indexed your book to know that valuation of an estate as community property is really more in 24 and 12 than it is in 27. All right, so the point is though that they'll have groupings, but don't be totally misled by the label that they give the grouping. And they tend to have 5 of those. They also will probably have, though not in every case, some library documents that are next to it. So they'll have, for example, 3 library documents: an example of a donation, an example of a mortgage, an example of a will, testament. And some of the questions will be drawing from that. So you're either a separate document or as an introduction to the question booklet, they will have these library documents, these kind of just standalone documents, ask you to refer back to it and answer questions about it. Most of the questions are in the form of a scenario, a fact pattern, and then they ask you a question about it. If they have 3 library documents, then you would expect that maybe 30 or 40 of the questions would relate back to those library documents. Could be less. And a lot of times they just use the scenario or the library document as a jumping off point to ask a question that they could have asked without the library document. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. But just to let you know, then you're shooting for 70% of the available points, and that may make you miss 20 and still pass, or maybe 18 and still pass of the ones that are actually counted. But that gives you, again, a lot of leeway for a certain amount of error, and you should go in there with a little bit of confidence that you could miss 1 or 2 here or there and it's not a big deal. But obviously in the aggregate, you really have to work hard to get there. Let me talk a little bit about the actual format of particular questions. And this is a PDF I'll put on, make available to you through this website after this. But I wanted to mention that they're kind of, here are some formats of the questions, right? And I've broken it down into 4 groups. First of all, they could ask a standalone question. They say on the website that all questions are related to a fact pattern called a scenario, but it isn't true. There may well be some questions where they simply ask you, what is the rule? Or they tell you, which of the following statements is true? Then not connected to any kind of fact pattern or people or trying to decipher a fact pattern. So they can ask standalone questions even though they say they don't. Here's an example of a standalone question, and all of these will relate back to this question, which is one of the easier questions they ask. But whether you've studied notary law or not yet, I will tell you that a rule in Louisiana is that a notary's signature is his or her seal. Or what do we mean by seal? You might think that it is a rubber stamp or it's an embossing tool. But weirdly enough, in Louisiana, that otherwise is big on formalities, your signature that you have on file with the Secretary of State is your seal. Now, out-of-state clients are going to demand something else, so you're going to wind up getting a rubber stamp and an embossing tool later as a notary anyway. But for Louisiana documents and in Louisiana law, the statement is a notary seal is his or her signature. And so they can ask that standalone question, and actually probably every 4th exam or so they do, and it's an easy point. It'll be a fast question that you don't need to take 3 or 4 minutes to answer. A notary seal is his or her. So I wrote this question, which is one that I've seen 2 or 3 times in the last 5 years. A notary seal is his or her A, embosser, B, signature, C, medallion, D, rubber stamp, E, both A and D are correct, meaning both the embosser and the rubber stamp are the seal. So it's a tricky question, but only tricky if you don't immediately recognize the answer is signature, B. So that's a standalone question. Now, most questions have 4 options rather than 5, but I wanted to show you one that had 5 because that can be how they do it. And I just want you to be aware of that. They're not going to have any just that have 2, like true or false. They're only going to have ones that have 4 or 5 choices. And it's odd because the examples they give in the back of the study guide use all sorts of different formats that they don't actually use on the exam. But in fact, the formats I'm talking about are the only ones that they do use. So the standalone question might just simply say a notary seal is his or her, and then you're supposed to answer B, signature. A scenario-based question, my second example, will give you a fact pattern, but could easily just ask the same question, but in fact form. So I wrote this one. John is a notary with 5 years' experience. Betty presents to him a petition for damages in a civil case. Her attorney has instructed her to execute the final page, a verification of pleadings, before a notary. Below her signature line is a place for the notary to sign. Betty signs the verification, and below that, John signs on the appropriate line and prints his full name under the signature. He does not use a rubber stamp or embosser. Is the verification properly executed? It's really just asking, is it good enough to have a signature on a Louisiana law document? And the courts know this rule, and they would accept it. So here are the options, but you can guess again, B will be the correct one. No, A, no, because the notarization requires that John use a rubber stamp or embosser near his signature. Not true. B, yes, because a notary's signature is his or her seal. Correct answer. C, no, because the notary's endorsement of the pleading is the unauthorized practice of law. It's a little bit of a decoy answer, and once you study Chapter 7 that includes the unauthorized practice of law, it raises a concern as to when you should get involved with documents. But merely notarizing a document that a lawyer's created is not the practice of law, so that's not the correct answer. A little bit of a decoy there. Certainly, yes, because a notary signature is his or her seal. B is a better answer. D, because the printing of the name under John's signature is usually considered an adequate substitute for the required rubber stamp or embosser. Tempting to pick one that's also a yes, but the notary's signature is her seal regardless of the printing of the name. It's not the printing of the name that makes the signature seal. When you read in book somewhere in chapter 7 that the notary signature is her seal, there won't be any explanation based on it being the equivalent of a printing or anything of that sort. So that's a trick that they're trying to get you, and the simpler answer is almost always the better one. And then there's a third way to do these questions, and this is a follow-up to a scenario. So the next grouping would be using the same fact pattern with Betty and John and asking a different question. And I'm going to skip that question here because we're running short of time. But when you look at the PDF example I give, there is a correct answer to it that I'll hide in the comments so that nobody sees it right away, or you guys can guess the correct answer for number 3 on our website, on our Facebook page, and figure it out. But anyway, what's often true is that a scenario then has the next question based on the scenario where they change some fact or now ask a different question. And then the next question, probably about 10 questions in a row, will be based on the same original scenario with variations that you're supposed to keep straight over the course of those 10 questions. The fourth example is a library document question, where instead of asking it through a standalone question or only a scenario, they refer back to a document. So although I don't give you a document in this example, I've just made these up to talk about today, the question could be something like this. This would be question number 4. Refer to document A at the paragraph marked 4. So in your library document, there might be a document A. And the paragraph marked 4. Assume that the line at that paragraph is signed, but John did not use a rubber stamp or embosser. Is the instrument valid? And the correct answer is B, yes, because the notary's signature is his or her seal. Now, you're not going to get all four of these that ask the same question, or at least three of them do, about a notary signature. Hopefully, you'll get one, and it'll be like the space in the middle of a bingo card, a free space, because you know this rule, and you'll learn this rule in any class you take or any reading you do. Let's talk about now resources that you could use to study better for the exam. There are several books out there. The only one that I don't recommend, so I'm going to start with that. And I don't normally speak ill of other people's resources. Any way you want to study that's best for you works for me. I'm not trying to steer you to our classes or our books in particular. But here's a book that I absolutely don't recommend, and it's called Louisiana Notary Public Exam, that you find on Facebook, that's written by somebody named Educational Testing Group. And you can figure out now why I don't recommend this book. It is virtually the equivalent of Tennessee Notary Public Exam and Nebraska Notary Public Exam and one other one, which have virtually the same questions. They are pitching this as Louisiana specific, and it's not. And the giveaway is they talk about the county clerk and filing it in the county records. We don't have counties, and Educational Testing Group doesn't seem to know that. So most of the questions relate to notary practice throughout other states. Well, the great thing about Louisiana notaries is we can do 98 things that can't be done by notaries in other states. Therefore, our exam covers 98, 99% of it, things that aren't of interest or on a notary exam in any other state, because they can't even do them. Writing wills, handling card transfers. There's a whole bunch of stuff we do that can't be, well, at least parts of the card transfers that we can do that other states don't allow notaries to do. So their questions are all about checking ID and filing things in the county clerk's office, and all sorts of Latin terms that are not in the study guide, so they wouldn't be tested here. It's a useless book. Don't waste your money. It could even steer you to the wrong question, but most of all, I would just think it teaches you a bunch of stuff that isn't on the notary exam. Here are some resources that are good. I'll start with something Fred Davis on PassMyNotary.com does, is he writes these workbooks that contain a lot of practice exams by subject matter that you can use to study. This is an older one, but they certainly still, you can see on his website, newer ones. And I think they cost like $225 or $180 or something like that. He has two. One is called Critical Knowledge Scenario Workbook, and one is General Knowledge Workbook. Of these two, the critical knowledge one is thicker, covers more area, is critical, and the general knowledge is more just covering stuff in Chapter 7 that used to be tested much more than it is now. So if you have the money and you like his resources, that's fine. So Fred Davis, who's an attorney in Lafayette, has written these workbooks. I'm going to now pitch my alternatives to them or supplements to them. One is that I wrote this book called The Side Piece, starting in 2020 and continuing today. I will put out a new edition of this in mid-February or early February, about 3 weeks after the study guide comes out, because it takes that long to revise it. So is it worth it to go ahead and get one now? Well, it's a close call, because most of the tips and information and explanation of community property and explanation of authentic acts and their differences from affidavits and acknowledgments would all be useful now, and you wouldn't want to wait till the last minute to get that. But I acknowledge that the index chapter and the cross-references chapter 12 and 13 reference pages that won't help you next year. So it's really hard to figure out what to do in a situation where the exam is so early that you can't get all the resources until it's almost too late. So I'm going to say this is what I advise, but I understand you might not have the money for it, and I'm not trying to steal your money. But I would advise going ahead and getting the 2023 one, if you don't have it already, and use it for the tips and the explanations and how to practice your timing for the questions and just all the law that it teaches you that I think simplifies and explains stuff that the study guide doesn't explain very well. But then when it comes time to index the 2024 guide, what you might want to do is just get the ebook version of this that's only $10 on Apple Books app or Kindle or Nook or Kobo Books. You can find some cheap version of it which will allow you to use that to add an index to the book for only an additional $10. So I think that's what I would do. Now, if you can afford to get the paperback because it's easier to use that for indexing a book, by all means do that. I'm not trying to shortchange myself here at all, but I don't love the idea that people feel they need to have 2 different years of it just because the way of the timing works out, that waiting until this is out in mid-February is a little too late to get its real value out of it other than the index. A second book that my wife wrote that I think is really invaluable is the Louisiana Notary Exam Outline to the Study Guide, this one for the 2023 Study Guide, where she has reduced the 700-page study guide to 200 pages of bullet points and simplified it as much as possible and given better, simpler explanations than the study guide does. She has a gift for simplifying. I love this book. She asked me like 3 years ago, what do they need that hasn't been done yet? And I said, an outline, because in law school, every class has outlines. In bar review study, there's commercial outlines all over the place. It's like, why doesn't that exist for notary law? And it should. And she's done that, and I recommend it. I think getting the 2023 version of that, if you don't have it already, makes sense. And then most of the information is going to be the same for the 2024 study guide. So either don't get the 2024 study guide or get it only in a $10 ebook form if you want to. But the reason I think one or the other of that is sufficient is the main difference would be the page citations in it. Whereas my side piece, the page citations are really crucial for indexing in some of the other chapters. For hers, the citing to a page in the study guide is useful, but it's not crucial because it's the information or the content, the outline part that matters. I mean, when she told me she was writing, I said, well, I don't think you even need page numbers at all. But she went ahead and added page numbers in for people who want to find the place exactly in the study guide. So I think it's a book that you could buy one of and not 2 of, and she'd be happy, I'd be happy with that. But I recommend it. The reason I think going ahead and getting it now makes sense is that waiting till the last minute till this comes out ruins the chance for it to be a simplified version of it. Or for those of you who can't get a study guide yet because you don't have the old one and it's out of print, this becomes the bridge by which you can study now, and then when you're ready you'll be ready for the study guide when it comes out to then fill in even more details and index that book and be more prepared. So this is kind of like what you can do in 2023 that will help you in 2024 before the study guide comes out. Another resource that I wrote that I would again maybe wait on is the sample questions book. It's also a workbook, not as thick as the Fred Davis one, but my questions are always in the form of how they're written on the actual exam. And half of the book is explanations in the back that explain the answers and explain the tricks of the questions. The reason I think you could wait on this, I think either 2023 or 24 edition would be fine, but you really wouldn't want to take a bunch of practice exams till you're ready for them. And so there's no reason to have this before the middle of February because you won't be ready for the exam and ready for practice exams. So if you wanted to wait on that, it would make sense. However, if you already have a 2023 edition of it, don't buy a new one. It'll be fine. The page numbers and the explanations will be wrong. Maybe 1 or 2 questions will change if the law changes, but by and large, this will be the same in 2024, except for the page citations and in the explanations in the back. So those are the resources that I would point you to that are available out there. One other book that I don't recommend is my own book, Become a Notary Public in Louisiana. It's really for people who haven't seen this. because it talks about the pre-assessment exam and the registration process. It does have a bunch of tips on studying, tabbing, indexing, and taking the exam, but the fuller version of those tips are already in side piece, and from what I can see, everybody winds up getting side piece anyway. From it just seems like whether you take a class with us or anybody else, it seems like side piece is just the fundamental book that people get. A fundamental, I guess, is the wrong thing. There's a final book you might want to look at is Louisiana Civil Law Dictionary. You can find it on Amazon for like $25 or something. That if you are having a hard time with some of the terms and the glossary in the back of the study guide doesn't help you enough, well, this has it's for lawyers, but it's a cheap and short way to learn a lot of definitions. Now, I certainly wouldn't want to learn any terms that are not also in fundamentals because they won't be on the exam. So don't use this to study beyond the study guide, but to explain or understand the study guide, it might be helpful. I'm just thinking you could have it, but it's not something that I push in any way. I didn't write it, but I was the editor of it. So those are some of the resources. The last thing I want to mention is classes. There are classes fall into two groups. All of the registered classes, about 30 of them, are found on the Secretary of State's website. Once you go to the Secretary of State's website, they say view registered notary educators or something like that, education providers. Anyway, there's a list of us, 30 of them. Of those 30, probably 5 of them are not really active anyway. They're just on the website but haven't been doing anything since the pandemic. But most, let's say of 25 of those, probably 22 are done in person at a classroom, an office building, a community college, or something like that. So if you need an in-person class experience, that's where you'd find it, and that's where you'd find one that's in a location that works for you. Then there are 2 or 3 of us who do it on Zoom or remotely. In my case, ours is on Zoom and also recorded, I think, for Shane Malazzo, who is inotarynow.com, and also through some extension courses like LSU. The Shane Notary course, or the iNotary Now course, is recorded in addition to it being live, so that if you miss a class or just want to go back and review the information, it's available to you. So, and the other one that I obviously think highly of is the one Michelle and I teach that will start January 10th, and it's on Zoom. That's how we do it remotely. And we send you a link at the end of each class that allows you to review it, or if you missed the class, to use it. Now, ours, unlike any other course, the links will continue to be available to you after the exam. If you either skip the exam or fail it, those links will be available to you and you won't have to pay again. But any of these courses, I think, would be useful. Do you have to take a course? There's no requirement that you do. I think the odds of passing without a course are low. I think a course helps. I would recommend it. But if you absolutely need to just try it once without a course and you self-study, well, the Side Piece book is about that. Or Fred's Davis's workbooks are about self-study. So it can be done that way. And if you're a real self-study guru, then that would be the way to go. Anyway, there are some advantages to taking a class in person, that if that's the best way that works for you, then do that. And there are also some advantages and disadvantages to taking like iNotary Now or some other ones that are starting now or December. I think iNotary Now probably starts in December 10th or so. That gives you a few more extra classes that my class doesn't offer because ours starts January 10th. So the advantage is you have more classes that cover more things in the book. But the disadvantage is it starts in December and you might not be ready for that yet, or the timing doesn't work out. So that's something you'll have to decide whether that's worth it for you. We think that you can compact it into 8 weeks and focus on the things that are most tested and not cover every chapter in the book. Although you're on the syllabus, you're assigned to read every chapter in the book because it could be on the exam. We recognize that really of the 30 chapters, only 20 or so are heavily tested. And so we'll cover 22 of the 30 chapters, and also give you practice exams and 3 practice exams and grade the practice exams and give you feedback on that and be available for questions. So obviously, I love for you to take our class starting January 10th. We're at notary504.com or notary318.com or notary225.com. I got all the websites for most of the area codes. Otherwise, childressnotary.com will get you there. But for Shane's course, that's inotarynow.com. And I know you need to sign up for it pretty soon if you're going to start in December. Um, one of the reasons we wait till January is that I find it hard to teach a class where the book isn't available yet. So our syllabus will have some assignments out of Michelle's 2023 outline until the book is available. But whether you can do the readings before the classes until the book's available is up to you. And so I've never taught my Tulane course until the book is available. And that means that we don't start our Tulane course until really the end of January. I teach notary law to undergraduates at Tulane in addition to the course that I'm talking about. And I've just never figured out a way to spend December talking about something where the book isn't out yet. I can't assume that everybody has the older edition of the book. Others feel like they can do that. So you choose which one works best for you. In addition to these full-length courses that you either can get in person or you can get online, such as Shane's or mine, there are some shorter courses that would be either a good supplement to those or a replacement for those if you can't afford or don't have the time to do a full-length course. Fred Davis, for example, does an in-person live class probably the end of January on a Saturday from like 9 to 3 or maybe 8:15 to 2:15. And it is an in-person class at a hotel in Lafayette, and Michelle and I attended it 5 years ago, and it's really good. I'm not. It's you pay money for it. It's a little expensive, especially if you have to stay in the hotel. But we paid for it. We benefited from it. He's an excellent teacher. So that's a review course or a summation course that you could do that I would only recommend if you've already studied a lot by that point in time. If you're just studying, if it's new to you because you haven't taken the exam before and haven't read the study guide already, then I think it's a little premature to get a review class like his is, because it is not meant to replace a full class necessarily, or especially to replace your reading the study guide. It gives you a practice exam that assumes you've already learned a lot of law, or else you'll do badly on the practice exam. I also have a review class. Michelle and I did a review video called The Final Lap that you would use maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the exam. That's on the website those websites I mentioned that some people use instead of a class or to summarize the whole thing. That's shorter than Fred's, but also cheaper. So it works out to about 5 hours, 15 minutes of summarizing the course and giving a practice exam there. If you take our full-length class, we go ahead and give you access to that and to another introductory class. So don't pay for both. And if you did pay for it already, then we refund that amount if you take the full-length course. So are there any questions I haven't answered about resources available, classes that might be available now, any of the rules of registration and especially of the exam itself that you kind of want to know now? Because you could do them in the comments and I'll try to answer them as best I can. Well, I went over in my time, obviously, but only by about 10 minutes so far, so that's not so bad. So unless I have any questions, you can always ask questions in the comments later, and we'll try to answer them. But that's another reason why those Facebook groups are so good. Questions about the format and what it was like the day of the exam, and were the rooms cold and things like that, are really pitched nicely to crowdsourcing it with our Facebook groups. So I would definitely recommend those groups, and keep an eye on Childress Notary Facebook group as well. For I occasionally post little things about how to understand usufructs or how to understand servitudes, and those are already on there. Those two are already on there. So kind of scroll down and you'll see a lot of little kind of shorter ways to explain things that I think the study guide makes unduly hard. Anyway, I hope to see some of you in our January 10th class. It's every Wednesday night, except Valentine's Day is a Wednesday, so we're pushing that class to the next day, Thursday, because some of you will be out. We're old and married, and we won't be gone, but you will, and so we won't teach that one class. 8 classes in all, plus the plus access to the pre-recorded classes that are introductory and summation. But I say there's plenty of courses you could look at. Do make sure that the courses that you look at are pitching to the March exam, because some of the ones you would start in January are really not going to finish up until May, and they're really shooting for the June exam. And if you want to take the March exam, you need a course that's fairly compact and intensive and will get you to March 2nd. For example, the Tulane class I'll teach in the spring will start in late January and will be not far along enough in March that any of them will take the March exam. Those students will be taking the June exam. All right, had fun. I'm sorry my voice is so gravelly, and we're open to any questions you might have about any of the process. Though, as I say, the Facebook group is great for that. See you guys. And now I have to figure out how to turn off a Facebook Live. I think I'll be able to figure it out.